So last year, I was sitting in the same audience, listening to a speaker sharing the idea. I remember feeling mesmerized and inspired, finally aware of a chance I hadn't seriously considered before. And that speech really stuck with me, not because it changed my life overnight, but because it made me start questioning something I had always taken for granted. What inspiration actually does to us. Because inspiration can feel powerful, like progress being made. But eventually, I started to realize that feeling doesn't always lead to change. In fact, inspiration often fades faster than we expect. Through this sudden curiosity, it guided me to a problem I've been struggling with for years. Why doesn't inspiration last? And what happens when we expect it to do more than it meant to do? All these thoughts also made me realize something else, that this kind of inspiration I felt that day isn't quite rare. In fact, we experience versions of that all the time, often in much smaller everyday moments. Here is what I mean by that. It is not rare to stumble across content like this, especially on social media platform. Most of us would even come across it almost daily, sometimes without even meaning to do so. And what's interesting is how similar our reactions often are. In that moment, we feel motivated, energized, and already imagining the self improvements and endless possibilities. We picture a version of ourselves that feel more focused, more disciplined, and more put together. It feels productive, even hopeful, to know that we are putting in the effort to improve ourselves. But then the next day comes, the harsh reality hits, and the motivation wears off. We sweep this idea under the rug and move on with our lives, wondering why the excitement never lasts. I started to notice that this pattern seemed to persist even outside of academics. Growing up as a huge nerd in crafting, I vividly remember myself saving these stacks of stickers that were nicer or prettier for a better moment. At that time, what I was doing felt intentional, almost responsible, like I'm doing the right thing by not wasting them. But then years pass, and those stickers that were once my valuables are now collecting dust on my shelves. I'm sure that this is a universal experience for everyone, right? And so, for a long time, what I thought was intention was actually hesitation all along. I wasn't preserving something meaningful, I was only postponing action. Later, uh, sorry, um, I never understand why that felt so satisfying. Later, I learned that there's a psychological explanation for this. Neuroscience studies suggest that motivational content can trigger a short term spike of dopamine, the chemical associated with motivation and reward. Our brains then perceive it as progress being made even when no real action has taken place. In other words, imagining change can briefly feel like achieving it. That explains why inspiration often feels intense in the moment but rarely lasts. Over time, this pattern trains us to do something to associate inspiration with feeling good rather than doing anything differently. So, when the inspiration fades, we often lose trust in ourselves, not because it failed us, but because we expected it to do more than it ever promised. In moments like that, um, I not only that moment changed how I understood inspiration, it also changed how I understood myself. In moments like that, I found myself reflecting on that time last year when I was sitting in the same audience. At that time, I was awed by this sudden wave of inspiration. I assumed that feeling would immediately or turn into discipline afterwards. But realistically, I didn't leave that talk with a plan. I didn't suddenly change my habits or feel more disciplined the next day. What stayed with me wasn't motivation, it was actually awareness. I began noticing all the time when I felt inspired but didn't act. But this time, instead of feeling guilty, I started asking why. That's when I realized that the problem wasn't motivation itself, it was how we were treating it. One reason we rely so heavily on inspiration is that it gives us something incredibly comforting: possibility without immediate risk. Inspiration allows us to imagine a better version of ourselves that feels safe and hopeful. For a while, we believed that change was possible without immediate risk. And there's nothing wrong with that. Inspiration gives us vision. But the problem only begins when we start to confuse that invitation with progress, when the actual effort is replaced by imagining growth. We often treat inspiration like a finish line, like once we feel inspired, something meaningful has already happened. But inspiration doesn't do the work for us. It doesn't restructure our routines or make decisions on our behalf. All it does is gives us an opportunity to act on it. In that sense, inspiration isn't the transformation itself. It's more like an invitation to start. And when we misunderstand that, we start to feel disappointed by inspiration, not because it failed us, but because we expected it to do more than it ever promised. And I've learned that when we do accept that invitation, inspiration can turn into something real. I remember experiencing this years ago, long before I ever imagined myself standing on a stage like this. I came across this debate video on YouTube, and there was this one particular student who really stood out to me. Throughout the video, I wasn't just listening to what she said. I was also watching how confidently she expressed her ideas and how clearly she presented herself. Over time, through small and often uncomfortable steps, I learned that inspiration can slowly turn into something real. Looking back, I don't think that video changed me. I think that it gave me an invitation to start, and the real change came from what I chose to do after the moment has passed. So maybe the takeaway isn't that we need more inspiration. Maybe it's that we need a better way to relate to it. Instead of asking why doesn't inspiration last, we can ask ourselves a simpler question. What is one small action I can take while the moment is still here? Sometimes that action can be writing down an email or writing down or writing down an idea. These steps may seem insignificant, but over time, these steps can turn inspiration into from something we admired into something that we participate in. Because inspiration doesn't just disappear. It waits for time, effort, and space to grow into something real. And as I stand here now, no longer in the audience, but on this stage, I can see that my understanding of inspiration has changed. Inspiration didn't change my life, but learning how to respond to it just might. Thank you.